In this New World weapon video, we're going to be covering the Hatchet, which is a mixture of a melee weapon and a thrown weapon that scales with strength and dexterity, although it scales better with strength by about 2 to 1 than dexterity does. Since it's very unlikely you'll max out one of your attributes until very, very late in the game, it's recommended that if you're going to use this weapon that you'll want to focus primarily on strength, unless perhaps you want to mix the Hatchet with some sort of dexterity weapon. However, your Hatchet will be less effective than if you mix it with a strength weapon, because the scaling is not as good. You can use the Hatchet as sort of a secondary weapon if you're planning on making a primarily ranged build, that one that uses a bow or a musket. It's not a bad fallback weapon, but it's probably not as strong as something like a rapier or a spear, who primarily scale with dexterity to begin with, so those weapons are probably going to be better, but you can do it with a Hatchet if you want. Light attacks of the Hatchet deal plus 100%, heavy attacks are 120%, and charged heavy attacks are 160%. These are kind of hard to land, the heavy attacks. The Hatchet has very short range and has a very small hitbox, meaning you need to be right on top of the enemy in order to hit, and sometimes even then, because it kind of slashes at a 45-degree angle, if you're not looking like a little bit right of your target, if it's a smaller target, like maybe a smaller animal, sometimes you'll miss. Looking at the skill trees, you have the Berserker skill tree and throwing skill tree. The Berserker skill tree focuses on melee combat with the Hatchet, while the throwing skill tree obviously focuses on throwing the Hatchet to deal damage. The Berserker skill tree kind of works on doing repetitive hits. One thing about the Hatchet is it has a faster attack speed than some other weapons like the Great Axe or Hammer, so instead of doing more damage per swing, you're going to do less, but you're going to swing faster. This works really well in questing, in my opinion, where usually you can get 2 hits in before an enemy attacks that you can dodge out of the way of, or maybe block. Whereas if you're using like a Great Axe or a Hammer, usually you can only get 1 swing in, then you have to block and it can take longer, or you can just swing through the damage if you want. But I feel like the rhythm in PvE is a little bit better towards faster attacking weapons, which is where the Hatchet, I think, shines in melee. The Feral Rush ability sort of leaps forward and does like a spin attack that hits twice, once, then twice. It doesn't have that long of a range, and you have to be careful when you're learning the range that if you use it at max range, sometimes that second hit won't land, and honestly, sometimes the second hit doesn't land anyway, depending on what your ping is. It's very good if you're opening into like the back of an enemy or maybe the back of a player. You can even upgrade it to root a player, which is great for PvP. But otherwise, it's very hard to land in a PvP battle or in the thick of combat in PvE. So it's not one that I really recommend using. The Berserk is a fantastic ability. It buffs your damage, it buffs your run speed when upgraded, it buffs a few other things. It has a fairly lengthy cooldown now, and it doesn't start cooling down until it expires. So you can only use it like, maybe a third of the time or maybe half the time. But it's very, very good when it works, and it increases your damage by a lot. It doesn't work with other weapons, meaning that you can't like buff with Berserk and then swap to a Hammer or Great Axe or a Spear or whatever, and then get that damage increase. It only works for the Hatchet. Raging Torrent is an interesting skill. It's kind of hard to land because you have to worry about being interrupted. 4 attacks in a row faster than you can swing light attacks is nice under some circumstances. But you have to be careful not to be interrupted, and you have to be very close to the enemy, which makes it likely that you could be interrupted. So it's very hard to pull off, but it's very good when you do. Most of the passives in this tree affect attacking multiple times or dealing damage when an enemy is on low health. So that's kind of the theme there. And Defy Death is excellent. Passively allows you to survive if you drop to 0 once every 75 seconds, which can be a lot during questing if you're not prepared or new. And it definitely happens in PvP, so it can save you there, which is really strong. Moving on to the throwing skill tree, the first skill there is Rending Throw. This reduces the protection of the target after it and deals damage. It's really good against heavily armored characters, especially like if you're playing one-on-one or if you're playing against a boss or maybe an elite monster. Opening with that can really debuff them and get you in there to deal more damage with successive attacks. And since you can throw it at range, it means you can hit them while they're moving up to you, which is great. The hitboxes with thrown weapons are really kind of weird to get used to. There is a slight delay when you use the ability from the time that you kind of like cast it to the time it leaves your hand. It's not super long, but it does take a little bit getting used to. And the weapons do have a little bit of an arc. It's not a huge arc, so you kind of got to learn and each of the throw abilities has a little bit different of an arc that you'll sort of get used to. I really, really like the social distancing throw ability. This does pretty good damage, and it dodges you backwards. What I really like about it is it sort of gives you an extra dodge that doesn't cost stamina. You can use it point blank to dodge when you need to, particularly if you don't want to use that stamina, or maybe you're using stamina quite frequently to dodge often. And it's very, very good in a build that likes to dodge a lot or uses, even if you're not using dodge, let's say you're wearing heavy armor, it's a free dodge that can really help you. It also slows the target, and again, CC is super important. It's not so important in PvE, but in PvP, slowing an enemy down can make it so your teammates can catch up to them, or you can catch up to them, or they can't get away. Very, very important. Infected Throw is an ability that debuffs your target, making it so they receive less healing and that they deal less damage. Again, another really good ability to debuff a target or a player that's charging at you so that when you're facing them, maybe they can't get healed for as much, or maybe when they try and heal, it's just not as effective. Can really give you an edge if you can get a couple of these throws onto the target before they get in melee distance, before swapping to maybe a melee weapon or going ham with your hatchet. A lot of the passives in this tree affect throwing in some way. For instance, one allows you to aim throw, allows you to actually aim and throw your hatchet separately from a skill just by aiming, which costs stamina. Other ones reduce cooldown or increase damage. The theme here is basically how to make your throws stronger. The Capstone Persistent Hindrance increases the duration of debuffs on the target when you hit them with a thrown attack. This is not nearly as good as Defy Death in my opinion, because most of these debuffs are going to impact players like far more than they are enemies, except maybe the Rend ability. Frankly, I think you're going to use Defy Death a lot more often, so I would tend to lean towards the Defy Death ability. As far as weapons that you may want to take with a hatchet, you're looking at either probably the hammer or the great axe, or maybe some sort of dex ranged weapon like a bow or musket. Those are also not bad options. It's really good at softening up a target before melee, in my opinion, with throwing. As far as the actual melee tree goes of the hatchet, I feel like it's a bit underwhelming because the hitboxes are so small. If you get outnumbered by even 2 enemies or 1 enemy more than what you have, you're kind of in deep crap. It's hard to hit them all with swings, whereas other weapons like hammers and great axes or even the sword have these big horizontal slashes that can really have wide hitboxes and really hit multiple enemies at once. The hatchet's more of a, at least melee-wise, more of a single target thing, which can be good in some PvP cases, but if there's even more than one other player, you might be in for a bad time. However, it could work well with something like a spear as well, like maybe you debuff them with the axe as they're closing and then switch to your spear or maybe your rapier and attack. That could work. You're not exactly maximizing the damage with your hatchet, but you're not really using the hatchet for damage. In that case, you're kind of using it for debuffs, so that could work as well. As far as armor goes, it really depends on what your secondary weapon is. If you're going like great axe and hammer or hammer, you're going to want to wear medium or heavy armor for sure. If you're going with a ranged weapon or maybe a spear, maybe you want dodging to be your main way of avoiding damage, it's fine to go lighter medium armor for sure. It really depends on how you're set up and what other weapon you want to use. I think really the main reason to play Hatchet, in my opinion, after thorough testing, is just because you can debuff at range. You're not primarily going to use this to deal damage, in my opinion. It's just, I mean, it can in a pinch, or you can use it to go hunt wolves or something, and that's fine. But generally speaking, if you're questing or if you're doing dungeons or something like that, you want wide hitboxes with wider weapons in order to deal maximum damage when you're swinging, and hatchets just don't provide that. And a lot of their swings can miss because of the short range. However, you can debuff enemies and then go in with another weapon, and that works really well, particularly on hard-to-kill enemies. So if you want to be able to debuff those, then it's not a bad option. Stay tuned for more weapon guides as we go through all 11 weapons in New World and tell you everything we know about these. If you have more questions about the game, make sure you check out the New World wiki, particularly if you're looking for like crafting material locations or to see what sort of weapons you can get. What builds are you guys going at the beginning of the game? What sort of weapons are you guys going to use? What did you guys think of the guide? Let me know in the comments below.